Today, we're going to dive into one of the most incredible stories in all of modern medicine. It's about how a tiny genetic mistake created a deadly cancer, and how an absolute game-changing breakthrough turned that killer into a totally manageable condition. Seriously, this story changed everything. So that's the big question, right? How on earth did we get from a diagnosis that was basically a death sentence to a point where the new goal is a life completely free from any treatment at all? The journey here is it's a blueprint of hope, not just for this one disease, but for the future of cancer research as a whole. So, where does a story like this even begin? Well, like a lot of stories in cancer, it starts with a single microscopic mistake inside a cell, a tiny error that kicks off a huge catastrophic chain reaction. Okay, so first, what exactly is chronic myeloid leukemia, or CML? It's a cancer that gets its start way down in the bone marrow, in what are called hematopoietic stem cells. You can think of these as the master cells, the little factories that are supposed to be churning out all your blood cells. Red ones, white ones, platelets, the whole shebang. With CML, something goes terribly wrong right at the source. And the mistake that causes all this trouble, it's incredibly specific. It all comes down to this bizarre event where a piece of chromosome 9 and a piece of chromosome 22 literally just break off and switch places. This little genetic swap creates a brand new, shorter chromosome 22, which got the famous name, the Philadelphia chromosome. And on that new chromosome, a totally new unwanted gene is born, BCR-ABL1. This is the villain of our story. So what does this new gene do that's so bad? Well, the best way to think about it is like a stuck accelerator pedal in a car. That BCR-ABL1 gene makes a protein that sends out a constant, nonstop, always-on signal to those stem cells. It's just screaming, go, divide, make more, over and over with absolutely no off switch. And that's the core problem in CML, this completely out-of-control, unregulated growth of blood cells. All right, before we get to the miracle drug that changed everything, you really have to understand just how dire the situation was. I mean, just how bleak it was for anyone who got this diagnosis. And look, that's not being dramatic. That's a direct quote from the research. Before the turn of the century, a CML diagnosis was grim. It was considered universally fatal. The disease would start out slow in what's called a chronic phase, but then it would inevitably morph into an aggressive blast phase, which is basically acute leukemia. Survival was measured in just a few short years. And the treatments they had, oh man, they were just blunt instruments. Back in the 70s, you had harsh chemo that just carpet bombed the body, causing all kinds of horrible side effects. Then the 80s brought interferon alpha. It was a tiny bit better, but it made patients feel so sick it was incredibly tough to endure. Really, the only shot at a cure was a full-blown stem cell transplant, a super high-risk procedure that most people weren't even candidates for. But then, everything changed. Science didn't just find a better treatment, it found a smarter one. This right here was the beginning of the targeted therapy revolution. And this is what made it so revolutionary. See, instead of chemotherapy's old scattergun approach, just killing all fast-growing cells, cancerous and healthy, a brand new class of drugs came along, tyrosine kinase inhibitors, or TKIs. And their genius was their precision. They were designed to just ignore healthy cells and go straight for the engine of the cancer, that BCR-ABL1 protein. Let's go back to our car analogy. If that rogue BCR-ABL1 protein is the stuck accelerator, then a TKI is the custom-made, perfectly designed key. It slides right into that specific ignition and just turns the engine off. It doesn't mess with the rest of the car, it just stops the one single part that's causing all the chaos. The impact of this breakthrough? Well, you can pretty much sum it up with one single powerful number: 90%. Think about that. With TKI therapy, about 90% of patients can now expect to live a normal lifespan. A disease that was once universally fatal was transformed, almost overnight, into a manageable condition you could control with a daily pill. It's honestly one of the greatest success stories in the entire history of cancer treatment. But the story doesn't stop there. Because once survival was pretty much a given, scientists and doctors started aiming for an even bigger, more audacious goal. A life not just with CML, but a life after CML. And as researchers point out, the whole conversation started to shift. The new frontier became something called treatment-free remission,
or TFR. The question was no longer just, can we control the cancer? It was, can we control it so well that maybe, just maybe, we can stop the medicine entirely?
So what is TFR? It's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. For patients who respond really, really well, the CML becomes so low it's undetectable by even our most sensitive tests. If they can hold that deep remission for a long time, they might be able to stop their pills altogether and let their own immune system keep any leftover cancer cells in check. Which, of course, brings us to the really big question. Who actually gets to try this? And, does it work? Well, the rules for even attempting this are incredibly strict, and for a very good reason. You have to have been diagnosed in that initial chronic phase, you need to have been on your TKI for at least 3 to 5 years, and, this is the big one, you have to achieve and maintain a deep molecular response for at least 2 years straight. You've got to prove the cancer is under profound control before you even think about pausing the meds. So what happens when those eligible patients give it a shot? Well, big clinical trials have given us a really clear picture. It works out to be roughly a 50-50 split. About half of the patients who stop their treatment successfully stay in remission for the long haul. The other half, they see the cancer start to creep back up and they have to restart their medication.
But this is the key. This is the built-in safety net that makes it all possible. For that 50% who do relapse, the TKI medication works just as well the second time around. So, under close monitoring, they just restart the drug, and in pretty much every single case, the cancer is driven right back down into that deep remission. It makes trying for a treatment-free life a safe, calculated risk.
So, after this whole incredible journey, what does it all mean? What's the future look like for CML and maybe for other cancers too? I mean, this story arc of CML is it's breathtaking. It went from a fatal blood cancer to a chronic disease you manage with a pill, and now, for a huge number of patients, it's a condition that can be functionally cured. They can live a normal life with no treatment at all. It's a whole spectrum of medical progress, all wrapped up in a single disease. And that leaves us with this final amazing question. The CML story created this powerful blueprint. Find the one thing driving a cancer, design a smart drug to shut it off, and get a response so deep that the body can take over? Could this ultimate goal, treatment-free remission, become the new endgame for other cancers? That's the hope, and that is the next great challenge.